against the machine in the morning. Yeah, thank you, Shelley. That's a very daunting introduction. Yeah, Shelley and I like to argue, but yeah, don't tell him I'm a huge fan of his. So I'm going to talk to you about, I also told Shelley I was going to keep it to 30 minutes, so I'm going to rock through this thing really, really quickly. I do have a PowerPoint because I work at a high-tech company, and that's what we need to do. So would you bring PowerPoint up? There it is. Yay! So I am Intel's Futurist. And in this talk, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about sort of why Intel has a Futurist, what I do as a Futurist, and then talk to you about some of the work that I've done. The work that I've done that's really coming to market right now, and then where I see things going kind of in the future. And we'll kind of walk through that, and hopefully that'll give us some good discussion points for today. So if you look at my first slide really, really closely, you will see that it says, I work for Intel and we have a lot of lawyers. There we go. Okay, so now you're all witnesses that I did that. Okay, so who the heck am I? As I said, I'm Brian David Johnson. I'm Intel's Futurist. It's my job to look 10 to 15 years out in the future and create models for how people will act and interact with technology. Basically, I create models for what it'll feel like to be a human 10 to 15 years from now. Now, that might sound a little bit like science fiction, but it's not, because at Intel, it takes about 5 to 10 years to make those chips. So it's of vital business importance for Intel today to know what people will want to do 10 years from now. So I'm working on the 2019-2022 chip right now. And we do that, and we can talk in the breaks and things like that if you want to geek out with the process. But the way that we do that is we have social scientists, we have computer scientists, we have statistical scientists, all kind of feeding into this. But everything is based upon consumers and upon people, first and foremost, right? Again, probably talking to a group like you sort of get this, that it's actually about the consumers and about the people. But of course, I work in a high-tech company where they think it's actually about the processor or the hard drive or what have you. It's radical that it's about people. So my background is I'm sort of half and half. I'm part principal engineer and then part designer. I also have a sort of a media background. Well, and pretty much this picture you have here will tell you everything you need to know about me. So we can get to know each other very quickly. The tall, bald guy on the left, well, that's me. This little guy down here, his name is Arthur. Arthur was one of the first robots ever created by the University of Essex in the UK. I do a lot of work with robots. I do a lot of work with AI. But as I said, when you look at this, you can pretty much tell everything you need to know about me. And if you haven't figured it out yet, evidenced by the fact that I went all the way to England and had my picture taken with a 20-year-old robot, you guys can rest assured, oh, I'm a geek. I am a big geek. I love everything science. I love everything science fiction. And that's going to kind of feed into kind of what we're going to talk about today. So I'm a very pragmatic futurist. Again, I have to build. I'm a builder. I'm an engineer. If I'm not building, I'm worth nothing. So everything that I do is to build this sort of actionable vision for the future. So, and you have to have a vision, right, so you can build it. So what will the future look like? So typically when we're shown images of the future, this is what we're shown, right? You have the really good-looking guy or the really good-looking girl. You've got the super cool technology. They're in the awesome, super cool environment. And this is normally what we're shown on TV and in advertising. When I look at this picture, I hate this picture. Now, I can say that because this picture comes from Intel, which, as you can imagine, doesn't make me a lot of friends in the marketing department. I hate this picture. Because if we're really going to have an image for the future, to build the future, it can't look like this. Because it could fall apart. No. Because when I look at this, I ask myself, where are the baby toys? Right? Where are the pillows? Where are the family pictures on the wall? Where's the stuff that makes us human, the stuff that makes us comfortable, right? So when I look at this and I think, this is completely intellectually dishonest. On my next slide, I have a picture of what the future is actually going to look like. Who would like to see it? Oh, you're all so polite. Oh, Shelley's going to beat you up. Oh, my goodness. I gave this talk once to about 600 students. You know, our future, basically. 600 of them. And I said, I'm Intel's futurist. I'm here to show you the future. Who wants to see the future? And I get one guy way in the back go, sure. I'm like, I'm here to show you the future. And all I get is, sure. All right, here we go. Hold on to something. Bam! Right? It's pretty awesome, actually. Now, for what I do and for what you do, this future is awesome. Now, this is a bit of social science research that we were doing in the UK. But for me, it gives a very accurate representation about where we're going. This woman has, if you can't see, she has a laptop, she has a smartphone, she has a connected TV, and she has a connected picture frame. Oh, and by the way, what she's doing on all these things is watching TV and interacting with TV. So, pretty awesome future, right? But as a vision for the future, what I really like about this is it's human, right? It's got the stuff, right? It's got all of the things on the chest of drawers, you know, the drawers open down the bottom, you know, she's in her bare feet. You know, this is filled with the things that make us human. And so for me, as I'm looking to design the future, I want to design a future, and I, in fact, want to live in a future that looks like this. I don't want to live in a future that looks like this, because this looks like prison. This is awesome. So that's sort of my framing, is I want to design and imagine and have a vision for the future that has people in it and that makes us comfortable. All right, so how do we do that, right? So that's, again, I'm an engineer, and at Intel, right, we have to have a process for doing this, and you have to be able to repeat the process and prove the process and all that type of stuff. So how do we do it? All right, so if you remember nothing else about my presentation today, it'll help me out, is if you realize I do not make predictions. Invariably, during the Q&A, some joker is going to ask me what Intel's stock price is going to be. I do not know. If I knew that, believe me, I probably wouldn't be here, and we'd all be rich. I don't make predictions. The Futurecasting work that I do is very much about developing an actionable vision for that future, basing it on social science, computer science, statistical science, and then having a process to get us there. Because one of the intellectual flaws also that I find is that people assume that the future is fixed, right? That when people say, you know, what's going to happen in the future? What will the future of this be like? What will the future of that be like? They talk about the future as if it's this sort of thing that's on the horizon that we're all kind of running towards, and we're helpless to do anything about it. And the fact is that that's not true, right? The future is incredibly complex, and it is made every day by the actions of people. Very much by the actions of you, and very much the future of TV and entertainment and media is made by you. You are going to do it. Don't let the future just happen to you. You build it. You're the people who build that future. And so part of what I do is to make these models based on all of this science to say, okay, this is kind of what it looks like and where we might be going. And it's not exact, right? It says we think we're moving in this direction. By the way, we might want it to go, kind of like as Shelley was saying, we might want it to go in this direction. We definitely don't want it to go in this direction. So then as we move, let's try to move that needle to where we want it to go if we're the ones who are doing it. So that's Futurecasting. That's the whole kind of the background on it. And again, to prove I'm a geek, I've got a quote from Isaac Asimov, whom I'm a huge fan of, because not only his science fiction, but also the science fact that he wrote, saying that predicting the future is a hopeless, thankless task. All right, so about 10 years ago, I started doing work on today, and sort of today, 2012, 13, 14, 15, and did some work looking out really to the year kind of 2015. And what I want to do today is kind of show you that work, and it's out there and it's public. I wrote a book on it. It's called Screen Future, which I'm going to tell you a little bit about later. But I'm kind of, again, at Intel, you're always sort of held accountable. So they always ask me, well, how'd you do, Futurist? And that's kind of what we're going to look at as well, to say, okay, smart guy, you thought things were like this. What's happening? And I think, and for me, I find it's a really interesting dialogue. Because again, I'm an engineer, and at Intel, if you disagree with me, it means you like me. That's the thing, right? If you don't agree with me and you want to have a discussion, that's a good thing. If we all agree, it's quite boring, and then we can all just go have coffee. All right, so let's look at sort of this 2015 work that I had been doing. First off, some stats. These will not surprise any of you. But about 10 years ago, we started seeing, all right, in the year 2015-ish, we'll have about 500 billion hours of video content online. The researchers tell me that this is actually low, that it's going to be much more than that. It also said that we'll have about 12 billion devices in 2015 that can connect to either that content or to each other. Again, they also tell me that that's low. It probably looks more like 15 billion devices. So we're back there, and I'm sort of looking forward, and I'm like, wow, 500 billion hours of content. That's more content than is humanly knowable, paired with 12 billion devices. That's more devices than there are people on the planet. That's a pretty good opportunity. And yet, at the same time, TV, in the year 2015, will still sit at the center of people's lives, right? This won't surprise you. It's, television sits at the center of people's homes. It sits at the center of people's days. And I have a great story to kind of illustrate that. I've now professed to you that I'm a geek. Do we have any science fiction fans? Come on, you can do it. Okay, some, all right. Thank you. Hopefully, even if you're not a science fiction fan, you have seen a movie about the end of the world. Hopefully. And if you know that there's always a point in all of those movies where the protagonist goes up to the television, turns it on, and it goes, or it goes offline, offline, offline. And at that moment, you know for sure that the apocalypse has come. Because you can bet that if television doesn't work, it is the end of days. Right? Now, to me, that's actually a beautiful thing, right? It sort of shows that humans have this deep cultural connection that if television doesn't work, all hell has broken loose, right? If Twitter doesn't work, you don't think the apocalypse has come, right? If you try to do a search and it doesn't, it's sort of slow, or you go to, if you go to Facebook and there's a problem, you don't think it's the end of the world. But if television doesn't work, you know that, you're in bad shape. All right, so pulling this together, he said, all right, well, let's get out there and start looking at what that really means. And so we sent the social scientists out, and we learned some things that you all know now. Two of them mainly. Number one, television wasn't television anymore, right? That TV was not this thing that was going to be on the wall, that television was breaking off the wall, and people were getting their TV on all these different devices, and that you would be getting that. This is, of course, what we've seen and what we've been seeing today, right? For most people, this is a TV as well. That's a TV, no big deal. One of the other things that we found out, that we started seeing, was that people's definition of television was changing. Television became this mix, this highly personalized mix of TV and movies and games and social networking and comic books and what have you, right? It was the things that you really, really enjoyed. That's what television became. Like, literally, you would go and you'd interview people and say, what are your kids doing? And they say, oh, the kids are watching TV. Of course, they'd go into the living room. The kids weren't watching TV. They were playing the Xbox, right? Or you would say, well, what are you going to do on Friday night? They say, oh, I'm going to get a pizza and watch a movie. Of course, they did get a pizza, but they didn't watch a movie. They watched a DVD. So for consumers, and again, everything that I do is sort of based around consumers, we began to see that television became this catch-all for everything that they were doing. There's a gentleman by the name of Dr. Jeff Cole. And Jeff, who's at Annenberg at USC, Jeff has this great line. He said that for many consumers, and he's been studying consumers for over 10 years, for many consumers, television is the thing that they are doing when they are not working. Which is really lovely, right? It's that thing when they are home that they are doing, or when they're moving throughout their day, that thing that they're doing when they're not working. Of course, some of us do it when we are working, but of course, you're all in the media business, so that's fine. But most people, right, it's that thing that they do when they're most at home with their families. So, how do we do something with that? Well, for myself, in the models that I build, they began to look like this, sort of these key experiences, how people will experience television and entertainment. And this became the kind of foundation of Screen Future, of the book. They're the main chapters of that book. And I want to walk you through them, and we can kind of talk about where we are. It's sort of like grade the futurist. the first thing that we saw, right, informative TV, and this is probably the one that is probably going the slowest. So what we were seeing was that we would have more information about the content in the TV and the games that we were watching. And what I mean by that is using video analytics, using computer vision, we would be able to sort of break open that video and take a look at it, right? So you'd be able to really expand the metadata. So here, here being an example, say it's something like Minority Report, you've got John Anderton, comes into the store, we cut to a close-up, the computer knows that that's still John Anderton, then he walks into the store, and we also know that that's John Anderton. We also know that there's all these other things, all these other products in the screen. And then we not only know that it's John Anderton, but then we flip it, and we know that in Minority Report that John Anderton is played by Tom Cruise. So what happens is television turns from being digital, like we all have it now, that television becomes data. Right? Television becomes this mix of coordinates and links. And when television becomes data, we can do some really, really cool stuff with it. The first thing we saw that we could do was the next thing, which is Ubiquitous TV, which we're all experiencing to one level or another, right? The idea that people will be able to get TV from their TV, but also from their laptop and their handheld, and maybe someday even embedded devices, that television sort of is going to move through people's lives, and people want to move television. Again, Jeff Cole's idea that television is sort of like being home, you can now carry that little bit of home in your pocket as you go through your day. And then also the idea that you'd be able to have those work together. Right, so this we pretty much saw happen, that you could be watching your television and you could be using your smartphone or your iPad to be able to communicate with that device to make a better experience. And then the third area that we saw was, okay, so if we have all of this intelligence, we have all these devices, couldn't we use those devices to help us find something to watch in that 500 billion hours of content, right? Your smartphone knows more about you than your spouse or your partner, right? Your television knows more about the television you like to watch than you do. You'd be amazed when we go and ask people what TV they watch. You'd be amazed how many people watch public television. Let me tell you, if you're from public television, you're like, really? You'd be amazed how many people, Shelley Palmer, hate American Idol and never watch American Idol. Nobody watches American Idol or X Factor or The Voice or anything like that, right? But so you could use that intelligence to help you find something to watch. And again, I think we're beginning to see that, and I think part of that is sort of where there's some really amazing work being done kind of today. But then the other thing that we found, which we can talk about at the break, we did some studies that these devices can not only make your television viewing experience more personalized, your content experience, but it can make your advertising more directed, your advertising more personal. Knowing that the television and the content business is a business, and you still need to make money. And so a lot of the research that we did was actually looking at the business models, and we did a lot of writing about that in Screen Future. And then the final piece was something called social TV. And in the book, in Screen Future, I actually say, I think in the very beginning, I am most excited about social TV, and that I could probably write a whole other book on social TV. And then last night, I was given a book called Social TV. Are Mike or Stacy here? Because it's really good. The folks at Wiley who publish it, it's actually really good. And it really gets into the nuts and bolts around sort of social TV and what social TV means. And so I want to say to them, thank you so much. I don't have to write this book. Because and they even say this in their book as well, is that human beings are inherently social. If you give us a device that we can use to communicate, we're going to use it to communicate with our friends and family. Television is inherently social. We watch it together, we watch it in bars. Even if we're not watching it with other people, we're talking about it. So television at its core is social as well. So for me, as you start looking at television and sort of the social TV, my question was, okay, what does it look like when television becomes the platform by which we're social with our friends and family? I think it's incredibly important. There's a lot of people doing really good work in that area right now. But then I sort of challenged my team and challenged myself to say, well, what happens when television becomes the platform by which we're social with our government? or it becomes the platform by which we're social with our culture or education. I think there's just an incredible amount of work that is yet to be done in this area, and I think it's really, really fascinating. All right, so that was 2015. Doing pretty good, right? So I think some of the on the video analytics side and things like that, and some of the tagging side, we need a little bit more work. But we're sort of coming into this world sort of the screen future, where it's all these different screens and they're all connected together. Now, really quick, because I'm going to want to keep myself to time, I want to tell you about the work that I'm doing now and where sort of things are going, sort of what lives on the other side of that world. And the first thing was that computing is not just for computers anymore. And I think that it's a sort of simple saying, but I think it's pretty powerful. When you start thinking about computing no longer is for our computer or just the TV. Computing has made its way into our pockets. It's made its way into our cars. It's made its way into the ceilings. Very soon it's going to be making its way into our clothes and our body. It's already in our shoes. And that provides a very different landscape. It's not this device-centered landscape. It's a very different landscape. So one of the areas that we've seen is something that we've been calling the secret life of data. And what we mean by that is that that's how it'll feel to live in this world of big data that you hear everybody talking about, or cloud computing, right? It will feel like all this data that we're creating, right, all about ourselves and about what we like and what we don't like and what we talk about and all that sort of stuff, that'll go up into the cloud and it'll feel like data has a life of its own, like it literally has a secret life. And the reason why is because it's true. It will. Data will have a secret life. You'll have algorithms talking to algorithms, machines talking to machines, more algorithms, and on and on and on and on. And that's a good thing. We actually want that because we can do some really cool stuff. But the thing we have to remember, and the thing that I'm working very closely with a lot of our engineers on, is to say, you always have to remember that data by itself is absolutely useless until it comes back to people. Right? Data is completely useless. Those are ones and zeros. It's completely useless until it comes back to people and makes their lives better, or makes them more efficient, or gives them a better experience. And we have to remember that even as we begin to build those programs, write those algorithms, and build those services. The next is quite obviously an empty slide. There we go. The next thing that we've saw, and again, as compute sort of moves away, and as, if we keep doing our job at Intel, the chip gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Okay, and here, by the way, here comes my really zippy animation. So what happens when it keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller so that all of these devices disappear? You're all shocked by the power of my animation. I say to you, PowerPoint! But that idea of saying that if it keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller, that it actually does begin to disappear. It literally makes its way into the walls. It makes its way into actually anywhere we want to put it, that we could put it in the table or the water glass, or we could put it in my shoe. So that it becomes kind of a ghost. It becomes this specter. So this is hence the sort of ghost of computing idea. Now, and why I find this is interesting is because it means if we're living in an environment of computational intelligence, right? If we have intelligence literally in our shoes and in the tables and in the walls, and we'll still have smartphones and TVs and laptops. Don't get me wrong, that'll still be there, but we'll be surrounded by computational intelligence. And that, I think, has a very dramatic effect on the entertainment, on the services, on the way that we think about building for that future. And then the final bit that I've been working on is a title that makes Intel Legal very, very nervous. The future of fear. They're like, Brian, you're going to talk about fear? I'm like, heck yeah, I'm going to talk about fear. And the reason why is I spend a lot of time, so as I create these models, sort of going out and talking to people. Not only talking to folks like you, but also talking to governments, talking to militaries, talking to universities. And a lot of the responses that I get, I'd say about 50 to 60% of the questions that I get are all based in fear. People are actually very, very worried. They're worried about their security. They're worried about their privacy. They're worried. Some people are actually even worried about the robo-apocalypse. I get very serious questions sometimes about that. And it really started to worry me. And so I said, well, I'm going to go out and sort of do a one-man campaign against fear. Because fear is a very, very dangerous thing. And let me explain to you why. We're going to have to make a lot of decisions, a lot of business decisions, a lot of policy decisions over the next 10 years. And making a decision from a point of fear is very dangerous. Because your brain, literally when you look at your brain on fear, it looks very different. And you can make 3 decisions when your brain is fearful. Fight, flight, or freeze. That's it. Now, by the way, our brains are wired to do that, and that's okay. That's a good thing. That's what kept us alive as we were walking through the forest and we heard a twig break. You know, we're like, is that a saber-toothed tiger? Let's go, right? I mean, you had to figure it out. But when we're starting to talk about, you know, this ghost of computing and this the secret life of data and all this type of stuff, we can't do that from a point of fear, right? And so we have to start figuring out what should we be afraid of and what shouldn't we be afraid of. And the stuff that we shouldn't be afraid of, we need to have a larger cultural conversation about, because this is not a technology problem, this is a cultural problem. We need to have that discussion in the media, we need to have it in our companies, we need to kind of figure that out. And then we need to figure out what we do need to be afraid of. And then we need to go fix that. So this is the stuff that from all of the work that I've been doing, this is the stuff that I make, basically. As I told you, most of my stuff goes into the chips. That gets fed into the specifications, and we sort of make these chips and use these models to do it. On the other side is the public side of what I do and the Futurecasting work that I do. So number one is I sort of write these books, partially also just to keep myself honest about sort of what's the research that I'm doing and sharing it with people to say it's actually important that we have a conversation about this and talking to people. And that's what this thing that we pulled together called the Tomorrow Project is all about. The Tomorrow Project is putting out conversations, putting out sometimes even science fiction based on science fact to get people to have conversations about the future, again, so that we're kind of not letting the future happen to us. And so now I get to have my Oprah moment. Everybody gets a free book! That joke, by the way, in South Korea does not play very well. I'm like, everybody gets a free book! And it's like, I'm like, oh, goodness. So I think at like 1:15, outside the one-on-ones, you can come by. We've got copies for everybody. My publisher has sort of given copies for everybody, and I'll sign them, and we can have a chat as well. So please come and get them. This is the Screen Future book that I mentioned. And by the way, 50% of it is the work that I do, but then also 50% of it is me literally having conversations with people in the industry, from government, from media, all those folks. So that's that. And then the Tomorrow Project we can talk a bit about when you come see me. It is science fiction based on science fact as a way to give people to have kind of a language to talk about the future. So I want to, as I begin to wrap up, I have a question for you, and this is actually sort of perfectly set up for Shelley's challenge. You can't let the future happen to you, right? You can't sit back and be passive. And the fact is the future of media, the future of entertainment, the future of what we're going to be talking about today is literally in your hands. That you are the people who build it, that the actions are done every day by having conversations about what you want and about what you don't want. Having arguments is a good thing to say, we don't want this, well, I want this. But getting out there and to be active about it, right? You have to have a vision for the future, right? You have to say, this is what I want to do with my business, this is where I want things to go, and then get out there and start doing something about it. Don't let the future just happen to you. And so my question is to you, if the future is in your hands, what are you going to do with it? And I would make a humble request that you not only have a vision and take action, but that you also, as you start to think about this future, that you also think about how you're going to make the lives of people better. How will you make people's entertainment experience better? How will you touch the lives of people all over the US and all over the world and actually affect their lives? Because that's one of the things we can do with all of this technology is we can actually make people's lives better. And for me, I feel an incredible responsibility being Intel's Futurist because we make the chips that go in a whole lot of stuff, right? And so those chips are going to affect the lives of people. And it's something that I've taken on to really, really think about what is that effect going to be. Not only to do good business. Again, we want big people's businesses to be around. Business is a good thing. But how will you actually make people's lives better? Now I have one more slide, and it is the most important slide. So I have to tell you a story. So when I was young and coming up in industry, I used to write speeches. I was a speechwriter for my executives. And I had one executive who, in every presentation, told me I had to have a picture of dogs playing poker. I was young. I didn't ask. I said, yes, sir. And I got really good at it over the years. So if there was a TV, I'd put a picture of dogs playing poker on the TV. If there was like a frame on the wall, I'd put a picture of dogs playing poker, right? You guys know it, right? The one with the guy with the little boxer with the card in his toe. It's awesome, right? And we worked together for many, many years. And then finally, when I was going to move on, I came back to him and said, okay, I have to ask, why did we have to have a picture of dogs playing poker in every presentation? And he kind of smiled and said, Brian, everybody loves pictures of dogs playing poker. Why wouldn't you have that in your presentation? And he was right. So I've taken on this mantle. I've taken on this tradition. But I'm a futurist, and I work at Intel, so everything that I do doesn't have a picture of dogs playing poker. Everything I do has a picture of animals using technology. The longer you look at this, the more freaked out you're going to get. And actually, when Shelley and I were together, remember the guy from Petco? He's like, that's genius.
Let's give it up for Brian. Outstanding. So I know people have a lot of questions for Brian. Brian, I just have the microphone. I'm going to ask the first question.
No, Shelley, I don't know what the stock price is going to be.
I was actually not going to ask you about stock price, and if I was, it was going to be Apple's, not Intel's. Well, you use it.
It just means he likes me.
They use Intel's chips.
They do. We love Apple.
According to some data I have seen from you guys and other people like you, today, using my iDevice or Android device, in my pocket, I have access to more information than President Obama did on his first day of office from all 17 national security agencies. I can actually get information that exceeds that. Information's not knowledge, but I have access to so much information, it's crazy. Our entire education system is based on learning things, learning facts.
Right.
And now facts no longer matter because I've got them. In your futurist stuff, culturally, we have to start to think differently. Will we? And if so, what are the mechanisms that are going to, in 10 years, deal with the fact that a grade schooler will have more information than all intelligence agencies on the earth do today in the pocket, in their pocket or in their hand?
Well, Shelley, no softball questions, huh?
You're a futurist. You're here. Go for it. Knock me out.
It's a great question, and I have two answers to it. One, as a part of that, is I actually did some writing. So in this, we actually did the future of education. Are we ready? I agree. Doug Rushkoff, who's a media theorist, says that we teach our kids to write term papers on word processing applications. We are not teaching our kids to write word processing applications. That is a problem. And I agree. I agree from a skill level, we need to begin to adjust how we think about sort of education. And you're right, I do a lot of work with educators where I tell them that, you're going to have all of this access, right? Not only, but there's a place in Sweden, you can buy your connected device, you can have access to the entire television cultural history of Sweden. Just clicked. You just click through it. And I brought that back to teachers here and said, in Sweden, this is what they're doing. Very quickly, we're going to be moving, or should be moving to that. And what the teacher said is they blanched. He said, my God, that changes everything, right? Our educational system is predicated on the fact that the teacher knows more than the student. And that's very quickly changing. So one of the things that I've been doing is specifically doing work with the tool makers. So inside of Intel, to say, part of it is to come up with some algorithms, so that personal TV and some other stuff, to say we can come up with sets of algorithms to help make sense of all of that information. That's sort of step one. But I don't think that algorithms can replace people at all. And so the next step is also then to come up with tools for people, for curators, for teachers, to also have an opinion about all of that information.
But the question is, do you think culturally, and have you put in the mix the change Right, because we know the technological change. We understand the law of accelerating returns and how fast chips are getting made and all that. We know all that stuff. But people have to change because they're going to react differently. Information is not knowledge. Tons of information. You can't go in a bar and have a BS session about who was in what movie. You just look it up in 4 seconds.
Right.
It really messes up getting drunk. I mean, you used to be able to say, well, I was drunk, I didn't know. Now someone whips out Google, they don't even have to type it in, they talk to Google. They say, you know, who was in that movie with what's his name, and the device knows.
Right.
How is Intel going to deal with that change? Like, how is there, and it's got to be lumpy across the entire world, right? It's not going to be the same homogeneous in every place. What, is this stuff you guys are putting in the mix?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what why we talk to universities. And we talk and try to get that conversation out there to get people to start thinking that we need to think differently about education, how we think about knowledge, how we think about questions, that it's not so much being able to sort of just Google it, but it's also then what are you going to do with it, right? How do you pull it together? How are you going to use it? How do you curate it? And sort of begin to have that change. And for me, I mean, that change starts in the schools, right? Because you have a different skill set. And we're beginning to see some of that. Some of the social scientists, there's a report that I got, and it's an internal report right now. I'm actually working very hard with my lab to make it external. And it's called Flux, F-L-U-X. One of the things that I do with the social scientists is, if you've ever worked with social scientists, I'm not a social scientist, but I sit next to one. And they always said for years and years and years, people don't change that much. That's why we use social scientists to say, well, if you're designing for the long term, right, you can use the social science because people don't change that quickly. But something really cool has happened in the last couple of years is they're coming and saying people are changing, that our habits, that these devices are actually changing our habits. And so you can, like I said, you can follow me on Twitter and you can track me down, but I really want to try to get that. And we're trying to release it by Q3 of this year that starts showing how those behaviors are changing. So I think it is culturally changing, but we need to have a much broader conversation about it.
Fantastic. Catherine, you got a question over there?
Hi, Josh Lee from Firehouse.
Hi, Josh.
What kind of a consideration do you factor in for energy consumption and projecting that as far as what technology is capable of doing?
Do you mean from a device standpoint or from sort of a meta standpoint?
Really both. I mean, I see limitations in smartphones as far as, you know, battery life being able to last a full 24 hours and then larger considerations like companies. Yeah,
the battery life thing, I love the battery life thing because if you can bust an engineer's chops, where I mean, you know, I take my phone and I go to the engineers that I work with, and when it's about ready to die, I just sort of drop it on their desk and go, you really need to fix that. And they go, what, Futurist? I'm like, just fix it. And you're right. I mean, this idea, I mean, you have these sort of huge changes when you have computation that you can carry in your pocket, right? That changed us. Now we need to have computation that sort of we don't have to worry about. I mean, the joke around our lab is that electricity is the new crack, right? Electricity is the new heroin. And if you think about that, when you go to airports and you see people walking in, or they walk up and they're like, hey, man, you got a plug? Can I use your plug? It's sick, right? It turns us into these addicts for electricity. It's ridiculous. So that's my take on the short term when it comes to devices to the engineers is fix it. And they are. So there's a lot of things with ultracapacitors. I've seen some really cool technology where you create ultracapacitors so just the force of you picking up your phone will power the phone enough for the call. So I do think we need to make those changes. On the meta level, I do a lot of work around, especially with the secret life of data, with smart cities and green cities, and even something now called startup cities, which is just fascinating, right? Because again, right, the future, I don't get to say this then, right? The future is cities, right? We have more people moving to cities. We've had more people moving to cities. We're going to have more people moving to cities. And the idea that we can begin to build what some people have called, it's startup cities, where you begin to design those cities like you design a complex system like a computer, and you begin to design them literally from scratch. And they become like test beds, right? Just like my lab is sort of a test bed for consumer electronics and things like that, they become test beds for these things like power grids and stuff like that, that then we can bring back, right? They're test beds in India, in China, down in Latin America, and we can bring them back to the US and to Europe to help make those changes, right? To improve our old, ailing, crazy systems.
Got a question over here.
Hey, Brian. Scott McLernan with UMI.
Hi, Scott.
Compelling discussion, so thanks for being here. So we're an industry, the video industry, an online video industry, sorry, Shelley. But we're an industry that's screaming on one side for standards and for practices, and on the other side, it's an industry that's screaming for innovation. I found your piece about fear to be really compelling, right? So if you're investing, you're investing for one of two reasons, either fear or greed. So as you look out on an industry that is screaming for both innovation as well as for standards, what is your opinion on how those standards or practices should be built, or how they're being built? It seems like they're being built by associations that may or not be that attached to the industry. So I'm just wondering your opinion on that.
Yeah, so my question behind that is always why, right? So like you said, if you're creating a standard, why are you creating a standard? And you're right. There's usually two reasons. One is either to standardize it so that we can all do it together, right, and it can be open, or to standardize it so you can keep everybody else out and you can sort of protect what you have. It's probably not going to surprise you where my stance is going to lie. Number one, protecting people's IP, protecting sort of how people make money and all that sort of stuff I think is incredibly important. It is. But a lot of statistics and a lot of the folks that I do work with begins to show that the more open a system can become, especially around innovation, and sometimes even the more uncertain you are about the technology or the service or the thing that you create, the more you can future-proof how you're going to make money from it. And let me sort of give you an example about future-proofing. It's something that I've been writing about calling engineering uncertainty, right? So which drives engineers crazy because it's an oxymoron, basically. But the idea, and the example I use is Twitter, right? I know Biz Stone and some of the guys from Twitter, right? And they'll tell you when they created Twitter, right, it was, hey man, what are you doing? Where do you want to go get a drink? That was Twitter. Where do you want to get a drink? Then they took it to South by Southwest, which if you've ever been to South by Southwest, it's all about, hey, where do you want to get a drink, right? You have about like, I don't know how many tens of thousands of people trying to figure out where to get a drink. They had no idea that just a few years later it would change the geopolitical face of the world, right? But because it was so elastic, it sort of allowed them to do that. So that's my thing that in standards fights, and when it comes to even just business models, that's the hard work of what we do, right, is trying to figure out how do we bring in this innovation, how do we get it as open as possible and get a platform for people, but at the same time still protect that IP. And that's business, right? I mean, business is hard. That's why we get paid for it. But for me, I always err on the side of keeping it as open as possible, but protecting people's property.
Let's give it up for Brian.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Brian.